the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchion Ford. Bird Culchion Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into the Bearcast on this Tuesday, October the 15th, 2024. We are live at 11 a.m. each Tuesday, including right this very moment on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page, which you haven't already. Go over there and please hit that subscribe button and that like button on any videos that you check out. But for everybody else on your favorite podcast platforms, we are with you whenever we're with you, and we're glad to be with you whenever we are. I'm Craig Smoak, joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer. Got Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well, and we do appreciate your time as always. After an open week for Baylor football, they are back on the road this week to start the second leg of their 2024 season, sitting at 2-3. It's now on to Lubbock to face the 5-1 Texas Tech Red Raiders and former assistant coach Joey McGuire, plus a gaggle of other former Baylor and Big 12 assistants. Everybody's interlinked somehow or another. But this one, a big one because, it's down to the nitty-gritty. 6 games remain, 7 if you're lucky, and 7 if you actually win some football games. But that's going to be easier said than done. But it has to start somewhere. So, Grayson, how are we doing this week, man? And do you think that this is the week that we can start to see things get on track a little bit?
It needs to get back on track. I mean, this offseason was one that just promoted all this momentum and optimism. And now, kind of as we sit here in the middle of October, a lot of that optimism and momentum has gone away. And it's because of what has happened on the field. And they need to get things turned around. Just had a bye week, a perfect opportunity to kind of get right. And we'll see if they're able to do that in Lubbock. I know we're going to talk about this game pretty extensively, so I'll save out on my predictions. But I do think that this matchup does pose some problems, but also does have some opportunities for Baylor to excel as well.
Yeah, well, it's the Big 12, so anything's possible any given week. We've seen that now through the first 7 weeks of the season. Nice for the Bears to get a little bit of a reprieve. I certainly enjoyed having just a weekend of not thinking about their psychological state or their physical state or their emotional state. It was nice to just watch football and not have to, put it under a microscope and try to figure things out. So we saw a lot of upsets. We saw a lot of blowouts, saw a lot of everything in a very entertaining weekend of college football. So we'll see how this weekend goes out in the LBK. We'll talk some recruiting on this show. We'll also get into a little bit of basketball as well. But let's get into the main reason why we're here, which is this game on Saturday out in Lubbock, a 3 o'clock kickoff, so you're not dealing with the typical night crowd at Jones AT&T Stadium, which can be one of the better home environments in the league. Still, it should be a tough road environment to have to contend with, although just slightly maybe off the gas a little bit because you don't have the night factor. Same thing like you play in Provo, still tough whenever you play, but it's always tougher at night. I kind of apply that everywhere else, so I still think the road factors in here, but how much do you think it factors in being back and going into hostile territory, especially a place like Lubbock, Texas?
It definitely factors in, but it's kind of interesting because the last 2 years, it's gone the way of the road team. And the road team hasn't just won the game. They've kind of blown out the other team. We saw Tech blow out Baylor last year, and Baylor went into Lubbock 2 years ago and blew them out in 2022 with a mediocre team as well. And so that makes it kind of interesting. Does that trend break? Do we see something kind of different this time around? I think in general, though, Baylor's previous tests this year certainly have prepared them for what they're going to see in Lubbock. I don't think Lubbock is a better environment than playing at Utah, for instance. That is one of the toughest road environments in the country. They also had to go to Colorado in a night game. They had to go to Ames in a night game. So really have had some tough challenges. So I personally don't expect that to be an issue for Baylor. And then on the flip side, Tech's played a lot of home games. So I think they're, pretty comfortable, obviously, playing at home, and they haven't lost at home either. So it's going to be a nice test, but I think one that, again, Baylor's previous games, the first half of the year, should prepare them for this kind of environment.
Yeah, looking at this 2-4 record and kind of having a moment to reflect on it a little bit these last few days, does it make you feel any bit different kind of watching how things have unfolded? I mean, Tarleton State's a good team for who they're playing. Utah is a shell of the team that we saw, and Baylor really wrecked their season. I mean, Trevin Maye hurting Cam Rising with the shove out of bounds basically derailed the entire year for Utah in so many ways. I mean, that was what they were built around offensively, and once he was taken out of the mix, they've been a shell of themselves, and now he's hurt again after trying to come back and play through it last week, which was not fun to watch from a fan perspective unless you're just one of these like sloppy people online that love everything that's negative. When you're with your 20 burner accounts, I saw those types of people like having fun at Cam Rising's expense.
He might get an 8th year. By the way, they've talked about a medical red
I think
shirt.
that would be
Pretty
ridiculous,
crazy.
and I think that's terrible for college football. I think him and others having 7th years are not good for the game. So I would hate to see that, and I don't think it would happen to Utah even if he gets it. I don't think that their fan base is interested in having him back for another year to do this same old song and dance they've been doing for the last couple of will he, won't he ever be available. So I think his career at Utah's done regardless of his 8th year. But you beat them. They're obviously different looking now. You beat Air Force. They're not very good. Colorado's an actually legit team. We know the story there. You let that one get away. BYU at home, they're undefeated. You completely blew the first quarter there, and then Iowa State undefeated, and you completely just got dominated in that game for the most part. I mean, it was close at halftime, but I don't think that anybody ever really felt like you were in that game to maybe pull the upset for many points in that game. I don't think anybody was getting their hopes up. I'll put it that way. So knowing all that we know now and kind of looking at that record, I know there's been a lot of, I've mentioned it, others have mentioned it, they've played teams that are like, what is it, like 17-1 or whatever the record is. I don't know. I've said it so many times already, and now I'm forgetting it himself. It's what 6-0, 6-0, 5-1.
4-2 for Colorado.
Yeah, so they're what 16-2. The Big 12 team. No, then you count Utah, and they're
4-2.
4-2. So the record's good for the teams that they've played, especially the Big 12. Whatever the exact number is, that's escaping me at the moment. How does that just make you feel in general about what we've seen? Any different from when we last talked before the bye week?
You know, there's nothing really different that I thought, but I do think if you just, again, sit back and look at it for what it is. I mean, Baylor had to play Cam Rising the healthiest he's going to be all year because he's done for the year, and Baylor got down 17-0 while he was in the game. So, like, if you take away that stretch, maybe that game's a little bit closer than it ended up being. The Colorado game is one where it's inexplicable how they lost that game because they outplayed Colorado for basically the entire game until the very last play. And then, of course, we know what happened in overtime, the fumble by Dominic Richardson. So that one's tough. BYU, you outplayed BYU for 3 quarters, and you still lost because you got outplayed so badly in the first quarter. And then, of course, the Iowa State game, which, yes, I do agree. You know, watching the flow of that game, it felt like Iowa State was going to win that game. But we mentioned it when we did the preview. It felt like, you know, honestly, outside of the blocked punt, that Baylor was actually kind of the better football team in the first half. The problem is that in the second half, Iowa State wasn't just the better football team. They were a dominant football team over Baylor. And so that's kind of what you have, a team that can't put together 4 quarters, a team that can't make that final play to win a game, that final execution to put the game away. They can't execute it. And so now that's where we're at. You're at 2-4, and you're kind of looking around and going, wow, you know, could be 4-2. Could be at least 3-3, but you're not, and that's the reality of the situation. I will also say this, though. I do go back and look at those scores. I look back at those performances, and if Baylor continues to play the way they've played this year, and then they can finally, you know, finish those games, there's room for them to win a few games the rest of this year and potentially get to a bowl berth.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is kind of the same that it's been. I mean, you do look at those games, and there is that element of, well, you played some pretty good teams. I just don't have a lot of faith that they're actually going to string it all together, even though the competition is lessened. It's almost like you'll find a way now to lower yourself, and that's what I'm afraid of we might see. Who knows? It's the fresh start to a second half. 3-game stretch, a break, and then a 3-game stretch. So it's actually very manageable. They've played arguably the best teams on their schedule at this point. So, just kind of want to mention that we are now 7 weeks in, and their schedule on paper is actually pretty good looking, and it's something you can at least point to and say, well, hey, maybe that's something that eases up in the second half. So I think that's kind of a common theme going around this week. Meanwhile, for Tech, they feel great. They're 5-1. They should be maybe 6-0 if Taj Brooks is healthy, in their minds at least. But you beat Abilene Christian 52-51 in overtime. Looked like you were getting off to a really bad year right out of the gates, and this was actually the worst that it's been was at the very beginning. The following week, Washington State on the road. As I mentioned, Taj Brooks is out, but John Mateer, one of the fun early players in the country to watch, although that's kind of cooled off the last few weeks, but at the outset anyway, he was one of the more fun players in the entire nation, and he ran all over you. 37-16, you lost pretty convincingly to Washington State, but then you turn around to blow out North Texas, beat Arizona State in a close game at home, beat Cincinnati in a close game at home where they missed like a 50-yard field goal at the end to send it to overtime. And then you go onto the road and beat a very wishy-washy, ultimately unimpressive Arizona team, but it was a really nice win for Tech to go out on the road because they don't go out on the road and really have that much success. So they played 4 of their 6 games at home. This will be their 5th home game already in just the first 7 weeks. They're coming off the bye as well. What have been your impressions of Texas Tech starting off 5-1? And you could look at their schedule and go, they should be 3-3, but they're 5-1. So the proof's in the pudding. When we like kind of like we're doing the make-believe what-if game with Baylor, but the reality is you are who you are. So you can do that with Tech and try to turn it more negative, but the fact is they're winning close games and they're playing with a lot of confidence and they seem to know who they are.
Right, and I mean, I'm sure Tech fans will say if Taj Brooks had played, maybe they beat Washington State. But let's be very clear. Washington State did whatever they wanted against that Tech defense. They ran all over them for 300 yards. It truly is an outlier game for the Tech defense outside of that one in the Abilene Christian game. If you kind of look ahead, they really haven't given up much on the ground, but in that game, they got ran over. So I'm not really buying that. They weren't really competitive in that game at all. But outside of that, Tech's been really good. I mean, Tech has won quite a few close games. They've proven that, throughout the course of the offseason, I know Joey McGuire mentioned this when he was on with y'all, that was a focus of theirs, winning close games. And so far, they've been able to do that at a very high rate. All of their wins outside the North Texas game have been within 1 score. Which is very interesting and something that I'm definitely kind of keeping in mind when I'm predicting this game and trying to figure out, what's the game flow of this game? Is Baylor going to keep it close? Is Tech really going to, blow out Baylor? Well, we haven't really seen that from Tech so far this year. And so while I've been impressed with Tech, they have a great rushing attack. They've got this ability to really do multiple things with their ability to run the football, be explosive at times in the passing game. They pick and choose their spots. They're multiple, and I think they have a defense that is getting better. I don't think that it's great. I think it still has a lot of holes, but I do think it's improving, and that's all you really want to see throughout the season. Offensively, though, I think this is a top 30 unit and probably one of the better offenses Baylor's going to play all year.
Record-wise, Texas Tech, 4 straight victories. They are 5-1 overall, as I mentioned, but also a very important 3-0 in the conference. Baylor, meanwhile, they're fighting for the bottom while Texas Tech is fighting for the top. The Bears have lost 3 straight compared to their 4 straight wins. They are 2-4 compared to their 5-1, and they are 0-3 in the Big 12 compared to Texas Tech's 3-0. So they are technically 6 games back in the league from Texas Tech. There's no shot at a Big 12 championship. There's 0 shot for that. There is a very good shot, though, for Texas Tech at 3-0. And they're right there in the mix with BYU and Iowa State, and then you can sprinkle in some of the 2-1 teams as well, whoever you think maybe a Kansas State could be in the mix. So these are 2 teams coming in on wildly different trajectories, wildly different feelings surrounding their program. And there's also the home field advantage. So let's look at this from a Baylor defensive standpoint. You've been okay. You've definitely been leaky in some areas. What would you say they're best against at this point? The pass or the run? there's been some good things against the run, but teams love to run against Baylor. It's also a matter of who they played, but teams are running like 40 times a game against this Baylor defense. I mean, and some of that you played Air Force, and some of that you played, but guess who likes to run the football? Taj Brooks and Texas Tech, although they're going to throw it 50 times a game. So, this defense has been run on a lot. They've been relatively untested up until maybe the last couple of weeks, and we saw Colorado have some success. We also saw them have some success. They also played a Colorado team that gave up like 8 sacks in that game. That's not going to necessarily be the case here, although this offensive line's not great. They are getting better. They definitely can run block very well. And Texas Tech is, one of the top 2 or 3, depending on what category you look at, passing offenses in the league, and the top overall offense in this league, I think, by a lot of metrics as well. So they can do a little bit of everything. They're the highest scoring team in this league. How do you feel about the matchup of Baron Morton, Taj Brooks, and really a talented receiving core they put together, Coy Aiken and Caleb Douglas? You've had a little bit of sprinkling of Micah Hudson as well. And you've also had Josh Kelly, their transfer from Washington State, who's been their best receiver. And then you've got Jalen Conyers at tight end as well. So they've got weapons all over. How do you feel about Baylor's defense versus Texas Tech's offense?
Not great. I think Tech is going to move the football. I think Tech is going to have a lot of success in a multitude of ways. But, I think in general for Baylor, the focus has to be stopping the run. I think that's kind of been the trend that we saw the last couple years. Last year, they ran all over him. Taj Brooks was unstoppable, which allowed Baron Morton to be very comfortable in that football game. I think in general, if you're going to beat Tech, you need to take away the run game and force Baron Morton to beat you. Maybe he does on any given Saturday. Maybe he doesn't, but I think that gives you the best chance to win. When you put him in situations where he's having to make plays on 3rd and long, where he's having to make throws on 2nd and long, that gives you a much better shot against Texas Tech than if you're just going to say, okay, we're going to let Taj Brooks run the football. We're going to try to, keep safeties back and really try to, play a vanilla style of defense. I don't think that's going to work. I think Baylor's going to need to put more guys in the box and just say, hey, you know what? If you're able to complete a bunch of passes deep down the field, then okay, congrats to you. But if not, then you're going to have problems moving the ball consistently. I think that's what Baylor's going to have to do. They're probably going to have to force some turnovers as well, which Morton has done a pretty good job of eliminating those this year. He only has 2 interceptions. But we've seen in the past, particularly in that 2022 matchup, Baylor got after him, and Baylor forced turnovers in that game. And those are some common things that I think Baylor's going to have to do if they want to win this game. So I do think the focus will be stopping the run. I actually still believe that is the strength of this defense, is stopping the run, even though they looked really bad their last time out against, obviously, a really good Iowa State team that it all kind of snowballed on Baylor in that second half. But I do still think that front group, that front 7 is where the strength lies. And I think in a matchup like this, that's a good thing. The question is, are you up for the challenge or not?
Yeah, that's been the question every week is that I think for the most part they have been. They just haven't been good enough to win the challenges. But I think that they've showed some fight. Although this last time around and maybe even the game before, you start to see little moments of you're like, is the effort there? Is that guy really in this all the way? And so I'm very curious now with a little bit of a breather to see if that continues on, because that's obviously not a good sign. And I think you started to see if they hadn't got the bye week and they had to play again, like I don't know how good that would have gone if they were playing this game last week. I think that they were getting to a point where it was starting to crack a little bit, and we were starting to crack a little bit. The fan base is starting to crack, and everybody needed like a timeout. And so here we are, and the one thing I could say about Texas Tech outside of just their normal statistics is they know who they are. They are a team that and I saw Travis bring this up. He had a nice article last week. You and I have gone, had our I think we were trying to say the same thing, but in different ways last week as far as like there's something off with this team. Everybody's got like whatever you want to call it, a lack of identity or a lack of difference makers or a lack of talent, which I don't think anybody was actually saying, but lack of difference makers specifically. We're all trying to diagnose something, and Texas Tech's just like, we go play football, we're take 3, we're whatever motto when we're doing this, and they know who they are. And I do think that Travis kind of pointed out, we're all kind of trying to put our finger on the button of, the exact way to say it, and I think that probably best sums it up, is this team doesn't know who they are. And person over player was a disaster. I mean, it had good intentions, but it just didn't make sense, and I think it took an edge off this team, if anything. So that's one thing that I think Joey McGuire definitely has going for him, is they know exactly what they're trying to be and what they're trying to do and how to get there. And you see these guys playing so hard, and you see them getting turnovers, and it's like watching old Matt Rule teams of just like the moment you need a big play, they're going to get an interception, or they're going to strip a fumble, or they're going to whatever. Or you start leaning on Taj Brooks in the run game. And so that's something I think definitely favors them in this game, is just you know what you're doing. You know like how it all works, and I still feel like there's a lot of just figuring out going on the Baylor side of things right now.
Right, and I think Baylor had that with the RVO. They kind of had an identity. Now, that identity faded when you couldn't run the football because, we saw in 2021 and honestly in 2022 for a large part of that year, they were physical up front. They were winning up front. They were moving people back and had, multiple games where they're running for over 200 yards and looking really good. But last year, obviously, when you couldn't run the football, now your identity is what? And then this year you come into the year and you've changed so many things, and it's just kind of like, okay, so what are you about? Are you about defense? Are you about offense? And so far this year, neither side has been good enough. Frankly, I think the defense has been a little better than the offense, but it hasn't been overwhelming at all. And so that's an issue. So I definitely agree with that. I think this is kind of one of those games, like you mentioned, where, they kind of need this bye week, I think, to try to find themselves and regroup. And I think going into this one, this is probably going to be the most prepared Baylor team you're going to see all year. The healthiest Baylor team you're probably going to see all year. The team that's most ready as far as, preparing the offense, because Sora Robertson has now had 2 weeks of, preparing as a starting quarterback. I think Jake Spavital is probably going to add more. I think he probably did add more during the bye week and this week to kind of try to find the soft spots in Tech's defense, but also soft spots in their opponents going forward. So again, I think this week does set up very well for Baylor to make a lot of changes and get better and improve, but it also did the same for Tech. Tech had a bye week as well. I think Tech is probably in a position where they're just trying to build on what they've kind of built towards, whereas Baylor, I think, is still trying to get to the point where they found themselves. And so I think there is a difference there between kind of how these bye weeks functioned. But again, I think in general, this is one of those weeks where you sit back and you go, okay, Dave Rand is a defensive mastermind. Can he come up with a game plan that slows down Texas Tech, gives his offense multiple chances to try to build a lead? And can he come out with a game plan that puts his guys in the best positions to be successful? Typically I've had a lot of faith in that because he has done that during his career. And we've seen it at times at Baylor as well, just him coming up with great game plans. And so I'm very curious if he's able to do that in this matchup in one that isn't favorable for Baylor. But again, if you can put Tech in uncomfortable situations, which they haven't really been put in, I think you could have some success. I think the two games I point to are Arizona and Arizona State, and even Washington State to a certain extent. All three of those games were very close games. All three of those games resulted in Tech not scoring a ton of points. They scored 30 against Arizona State, 28 against Arizona, 16 against Washington State. What they all have in common is Tech ran for less than 150 yards in those games. And specifically Arizona State and Arizona, they ran for less than 135 yards. That gave those teams a chance to have success. That gave their secondary a chance to have success against Baron Morton. And they were able to hold Morton under 50% completion percentage because of that. And so that's why I kind of think the blueprint needs to be slow down Taj Brooks, force Baron Morton to beat you, and then hopefully you have a game plan to kind of eliminate that.
Yeah, well, they have a lot of targets. Mentioned Aiken and Kelly and Hudson and all those guys, and Conyers at tight end, and Brooks, and Morton can run a little bit in addition to throwing the ball around. So it's going to be quite the challenge. And I mentioned kind of the lack of identity thing and how that plays into every other kind of way you want to pick apart this team, lack of oomph or whatever, the cracks that we're starting to show the other week. I also, mentioned that to say as well about Texas Tech is part of that identity is not only like, Taj Brooks running the football and then big plays on offense and all that, but they're tough. And that's part of the Matt Rule rub and just Joey as well. But they're they're forcing turnovers because they're hitting licks on. I mean, not hitting licks like that slang, but they're delivering some blows to guys. I mean, they're stripping the ball, but they're also playing physical, and it's reminiscent of those old Matt Rule Baylor teams. And I think if Baylor walks into this one and they're not aware of who they are, or they don't have the right mindset, and they are going to be that team that's more looking like, hey, are they starting to pull the towel out of their back pocket? And they're going to get thumped on Saturday. Like, they're going to get bullied and beat up, because I guarantee you Tech's can come out there head hunting, ready to knock some heads off. And Baylor better be ready for that. And you would assume that they will be, but it's just you don't know with this team kind of what you're going to get. But I'd expect some pad slapping and some real physical football. And so if they're not, I think, in that mindset going into this game, then that's something that could really flip, against them. With the home crowd on top of you, and just, we know one thing goes wrong, everything starts to kind of go wrong. So I think the start of this game and just kind of the tone that is set physically and all of that is going to be very important in this game for this Baylor football team.
I would agree with that. I think it is going to start for both of these defenses. And, honestly, Baylor's been the better defense between the two so far this year.
Well,
and that's a big part of this, but I agree with you. Physicality is going to be a big thing, and I honestly think we're probably going to find that out rather early on in the game as well.
Yeah, and I know that's something like, hey, don't turn the ball over and get sacks, and it's like, but no, like, you really do have to sometimes like ratchet up the physicality a little bit more, and I think that's one of those games. They know you're wounded. And Joey was with us, and I do believe him when he says this isn't like as personal as it was the last couple of years. Like, he got his lick back last year. They embarrassed Tech 2 years ago in Lubbock, probably the worst home loss they've had. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd have to imagine it's right there. And then they beat you like everybody else did last year, but they got their look back. But this year it doesn't have that feel because Baylor's just so not in it that and so much time has passed now as well. It's like, who cares anymore about the back in the fourth? But they're going to be prime ready to go, and they see a wounded animal rolling in. They want to be 6-1. They want to be 4-0 in the big. Like, they're going to be ready to play, man. And the only thing missing from them being ratcheted all the way up to 10 is the fact that it's a day game. But outside of that, like, just saying, Baylor's going to have their head screwed on tight, or they're going to get, a BYU type of first quarter potentially and get overwhelmed early on, and then have to find themselves digging out of a hole. So part of that is, what can this offense do? Like, we feel like the defense is going to have its work cut out for them because Tech's got a lot of great weapons. Again, number one scoring offense in the Big 12, all that jazz. I do agree that it starts with stopping Taj Brooks to the best of your abilities. And, yeah, if Baron Morton's going to throw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, well, so damn be it, but it's better than Taj Brooks running for 180 and 2. So you kind of know what you're doing defensively. Offensively, Tech is not very good. Tech is not very good defensively. Offensively, Baylor's got to feel like they've potentially got some things up their sleeves that could be effective. But Tech also has some guys coming back, like one of their better corners is now back in action, and so they're getting healthier. I don't think they were great fully healthy, but they could be getting better as a result of some health returning. So there is that, but statistically through these first few weeks, they are one of the worst defenses in the Big 12. So your thoughts on Sawyer Robertson and the rest of the Baylor offense, because the Baylor offense right now is pretty much whatever Sawyer Robertson can do, and then what a Josh Cameron or somebody can catch, once or twice a game to put points on the board, and beyond that, there's not a whole lot else. So you think there'd be some openings here, but then again, you haven't really shown the ability to do much with what you've got. So how do you feel about the Baylor offense versus the Tech defense?
I mean, Texas Tech fans and Texas Tech in general may use this as bulletin board material, but this sets up perfectly for Baylor to have a lot of success on offense. And there are a lot of factors that we can look at. I mean, first of all, let's be clear about Baylor's first schedule here. They've had to play some teams that had overwhelming defenses. I mean, Iowa State per SP Plus is the number 11 defense in the country. Utah, number 13. BYU, number 31. And then, of course, Colorado is the outlier as far as their Power 4 opponents, as they're down at 70th, and that is still 6 spots ahead of Tech. Tech is the worst Power 4 defense Baylor's played this year. Outside of Colorado, who Baylor scored 31 points on, they've had to play really, really tough defenses all year long. Again, I think that prepares them for what they're going to see in Lubbock over the weekend. I think this is one of those games where if Baylor comes out and starts really slow, I think this is one of those games, like you said, well, then you could start turning the ball over and then things could snowball. But in general, if Baylor is playing like they have really in large part the whole year since Sora Robertson became the starting quarterback, they should honestly not have too many issues moving the football. Tech does not do a good job getting after the quarterback. They're 118th in the nation in sacks. That's obviously been a huge problem for Baylor. They're outside the top 100 in tackles for loss, which that's huge for Baylor because the Bears really, you see them every week try to run the football up the middle, and it ends up being, second and 11. And so against Tech hasn't proven that they're going to be able to do that. They haven't proven that they're going to get after the quarterback. Those things could obviously change in this game, but so far this year, that's very favorable. In the passing game, Tech gave up 506 yards to Abilene Christian, 282 to Arizona State, 426 to Cincinnati, and then 300 to Arizona. Again, this sets up for the passing game to do a lot of things well. And this makes me believe that this is a Sawyer Robertson game. Tech has been pretty good when you're just handing the ball up the middle with your running backs, but they have not done a good job at stopping running quarterbacks. Sorsby from Cincinnati ran for over 50 yards. John Mateer at Washington State, which is a totally different level of athlete, ran for 197 yards against Tech as well. So there's going to be opportunities for Sawyer to run the football, throw the football, and really have success against this Texas Tech defense. I think the one area that I keep looking at when I go back and try to examine how this game is going to unfold, Tech has allowed 28 opponent red zone attempts this year. That is outside the top 100 in the nation, but they've only allowed 23 scores. That's a solid percentage. It puts you inside the top 60 in the country. You look at Baylor, they're number 108 in the nation in converting on those red zone chances, 13 out of 17. That's the number that has to give here. I think Baylor's going to have the opportunity to get into the red zone a ton. Can they make their field goals and can they score touchdowns? I think is going to be a huge key for this offense from the standpoint of, do you score 23 points in this game or do you score 34 points in this game? I think that's going to be a huge factor in deciding it, but everything sets up pretty well for Sawyer Robertson, this Baylor passing attack, to have some success.
Tech currently 6.5-point favorites as it stands right now. It's kind of been the case since that line opened. I think it's stayed pretty much right around there at this stage. And you go by like the ESPN matchup predictor, which I don't know how accurate that is overall, but they're like 65, 66, 67%. So like 2/3 of the favorites arrows point in their direction versus Baylor. So they're pretty clear favorites in this game, although you can see based on the numbers and just discussion kind of here is there, are ways to win this game. This is not one that's out of the equation entirely, although I do think the location and just the kind of momentum and things like that certainly tilt this even further in Texas Tech's favor. But yeah, it's a game that's, winnable if you play your best game, but that's every game in the Big 12. So I'm just kind of repeating the weekly motto here. That's the case against Iowa State. That's the case against TCU. That's the case against UCF. That's the case against Texas Tech. That's life in the Big 12. And, I'd expect nothing less. So special teams-wise, is there really anything that stands out in this regard? I mean, Baylor's punted the ball well. They've been okay on coverage units. Field goals have really hurt them more than anything else, honestly. Like, they've made some kicks, but the ones that stick out are the ones that you've missed. And that's just facts. Like, sorry, you win the Colorado game if you make a field goal. And we're talking a completely different season at 3-3 than at 2-4. And that's just the main example that you can use. But anything from their end or Baylor that is something that you think could tilt this game in a direction either way?
Pretty major edge for Tech in field goal kicking. They have not missed a kick, whether it's extra points or field goals. 13 out of 13 on field goals. They've been really good in that area. I'll give the minor edge to Baylor in punting, as Tech's kick punter's been pretty good, but Palmer Williams has been one of the best in the nation for Baylor. Return game, both have an explosive guy. Jamal Bell for Baylor, Dre McCray for Texas Tech. So I'd say it's pretty even there. But yeah, if this game comes to field goal kicking, if Baylor keeps kicking the way they have this year, then yeah, they're probably not going to win this game because Tech has been far more consistent in that regard. That's kind of the main thing special teams-wise, I would say, is just the field goal kicking is kind of the disparity point.
All right. Anything else on Texas Tech at writ large, or I guess anything that we haven't touched on as far as Texas Tech and what stands out about them?
I just think in general this is a huge game, and we've gone back and forth on this. I've had multiple conversations with a lot of people about this game, and I truly do feel like this season kind of hinges on this game. I think if Baylor wins this game, they got a great shot at making a bowl game. I really do. I think that you look at the rest of their schedule, it's kind of all in front of them. If they lose this game, though, expecting them to go 4-1 the rest of the season seems pretty unrealistic to me.
It's not happening.
And so that's why this game, to me, feels like one that it's a must-win, I think, for Baylor. And I know Tech, it's a must-win for them to win in the Big 12. That's fine. But I do think Baylor should be going into this game with saying, we're a better team than our record shows. This is a game we have to win. You're coming off a bye week. You're never going to be more prepared or more healthy than this game. It's got to be a game you win. If you can't win this kind of game, then you're probably not going to win out the rest of the way, which means you're not going to a bowl game, which was the ultimate goal at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I would say that of their 6 games remaining, this might be the toughest one, although going to Morgantown, West Virginia, they're kind of in a weird spot. They're all against Neil Brown again because of the loss to Iowa State, and they're in a spot where Baylor fans might find this familiar. You never win big games. You always stumble and trip over yourself in the biggest moments, and they're just kind of sick of it now because that's been just Neil Brown for 5 years. And it reminded me a lot of hearing from, it's like, hey, little cool things here and there, but you got to win football games, and especially the ones that matter. And this is a game that matters. And if Baylor were to win this one, then yeah, I think that would be a big deal. And I mean, Oklahoma State at home, that seems winnable now. TCU at home, that seems winnable now. At West Virginia, I mean, who knows there. At Houston, I mean, winnable.
Yeah.
Kansas at home, winnable. But I could also see you losing every single one of those games. So that's where Baylor finds itself. Are they going to fight to get into the middle at any point this season, or are they just going to take it laying down and just get pummeled and ensure that there are massive changes coming? Because one thing with all the talk about Aranda, I know when you're younger, you don't know anybody, you start just calling for people to get fired left and right like it's no big deal. That's I'm sure maturity will eventually set in. You realize how poor taste that is. Doesn't mean you can't feel like there needs to be a change, but I think we can at least go hey, there's 6 weeks left. Let's just see what happens. We don't need the head on a platter right this very second, because quite frankly, it doesn't change anything doing it right now.
It doesn't.
You don't get any head start on recruiting. It does GJ Kinney's not going to leave Texas State in the middle of the year, or Jamie Chadwell, or whoever, Barry Odom, or whoever's been mentioned. But you could definitely ensure some changes by going 0-6 the rest of the year, because there would be no way you could sit there and say, well, the recruiting class looks, they have a little bit. No, they'd have nothing. So, this is a tone setter for the second half. If you lose it, it doesn't crater you, because, again, there's still some winnable games. But I do feel like it might if you do lose this game, because then you're going, all right, we're 2-5. We got to go 5 and what? No, we have to go 4-1. Yeah, 4-1. Which at that point, why would we believe at all that you would do that? Because you just came out of the bye week and lost again.
And you have street killers on there where you're 1-9 against TCU in the last 10. You've never won in Morgantown. Expecting all of these things to just return and then you make these things happen seems pretty unrealistic. And that's why I just think you put so much time into this game over 2 weeks with a bye week. This feels like the game that you've put so much into, and if you come up and fail again, it just is hard for me to get around to the idea that, okay, but then things are going to just turn around next week and then the week after. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that. Maybe I'm wrong in that regard, but I just think you've put so much into this game. This game matters so much. It is winnable. Your offense is going to be put in positions to succeed in this game. If you can't get it done, it really is a tough one, especially with all, the other ramifications like recruiting and, prestige in the state of Texas. This is the kind of game that definitely does matter. Their next 3 specifically really matter in that regard.
Yeah, and if, I'm talking about a lot of the younger crowd too, if you don't start showing some sign of life, those home games remaining, I mean, we saw kind of what it was before the break. you got to give something for the students to latch onto and for people to get excited about. And so that's also part of this is you got a couple home games coming up right after this. How can you start to, win people back? Go beat Texas Tech, and I think that would get people excited to say, like, all right, well, they might win this next. Let's at least go and see. But if you lose this one, then I think, like, it's empty stadiums and it's, more of the S rolling downhill for everybody. Who's
get a
maybe
crowd,
got 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah, you'll get a crowd next week just for homecoming, which, again, if you go out there and you lose that game, I mean, it just gets worse and worse, right? It just builds on itself. But I think you're right. You go out and lose this game, and now you're sitting at 2-5, and basically no one thinks you're going to a bowl game. That's a tough sell.
Yeah. So they find themselves in a tough predicament, one of their own making, obviously, but one that is right there in front of them and unavoidable. I mean, you can't swerve and miss it and just go back to business. Like, you got to take this challenge head on with Texas Tech as underdogs in Lubbock. But on paper, it's not a matchup that you can't find a way to win. It's just a matter of, can you find a way to win? So very interesting and very important, this game right here, for all the reasons that we mentioned and beyond. Just the faith of the fan base, the trajectory of the program, and, how about make a little bit of noise in the Big 12 and kind of make this thing even more screwy than it already is and hand Tech their first loss. So there's a lot that can come from this game, both positively and negatively, but wherever you sit on your opinions, we can all agree that this is a must-win in so many ways for this football team.
I'm right there with you, and I just think getting the fan base back in is so key the rest of this year, I think. And this is a start to doing that, because I do think you beat Tech, there's going to be a lot more optimism, or at least a lot more excitement coming down the stretch in games that you need your fans to be excited for.
Yeah, definitely. So there you go. There's a little bit on Texas Tech and just what to look out for, expect, and all that this weekend. It's a big one. There's no sugarcoating that. Not going to try to hype up the rest of these. If they lose this weekend, not going to be sitting there like, Oklahoma State's a huge game. It's like, no, this one's – it's the biggest because it's in front of them, but it's also the biggest ramification-wise because it's setting the tone for the rest of the way. So we will see this weekend. But, again, 6.5-point underdogs rolling in, and I'm sure a feisty crowd awaiting the Bears this Saturday afternoon. So should be a good one, should be fun, and we'll see how that all shakes out. Meanwhile, on the recruiting front, and, these two teams compete for plenty of recruits. Who was it that Baylor won out for? And then you had staffers out in Lubbock talking about, like, the checks won't cash. Who was that?
Well, it's actually Caleb Burns was the one who they flipped from Tech, and now Caleb Burns just visited Oregon over the weekend, and things are starting to trend in that direction. He's going to visit Oklahoma. We're going to talk about him, so might as well right now.
Yeah, go ahead. But my point was that this is also not only important for, like, the trajectory in the future and Dave Aranda and just all that, but recruiting-wise, you compete for a lot of the same guys. They've won some, you've won some. And while I don't really lean into the whole – the old staff and the bad blood and all that. I touched on that a few minutes ago. There is that element, I think, especially in recruiting, like that competitiveness. So, you want to beat your old employer, and you want to beat the guys who left and think that they're better off. And so there's that. So there's all sorts of little sub-layers as well. But recruiting-wise, how big is this game? And I guess let's start off with Caleb Burns here on the Oregon side of things.
Big perspective, it's huge because Baylor and Tech do compete a lot on the recruiting trail. Just like when we talk about Oklahoma State and the TCU game, really those three are three of your biggest competitors on the recruiting trail. I think you could argue they're the top three, to be honest, because you're kind of competing for the same guys in a lot of regards. It's huge there. Tech also has some Baylor staffers, and so there is some I'm not going to say bad blood, but there's definitely some competitiveness between that group. And so, Caleb Burns, he ended up, flipping to Baylor from Texas Tech. Huge win for the staff at the time. And now fast forward to the start of this year, Caleb Burns is on track to maybe be a first-team All-State guy. He's one of the best defensive prospects in the state of Texas. He's definitely been one of the most productive this year. And it kind of all turned into, his film's starting to come out, and now Oregon, Ole Miss, Oklahoma all offered him. And so that's where things kind of started to turn. Scheduled the visit to Oregon. Of course, ends up going to the Oregon game in which they played probably the best game of the year against Ohio State in a crazy environment. He's going to go to Oklahoma next weekend. I think they play South Carolina. So he'll be in attendance for that game.
That might play in their favor. It might not, based on what Oklahoma's doing right now.
We'll see what happens.
The defense
there
is good, but it's the mood around Venables isn't great right now.
Yeah, so I would say right now, things aren't trending in a good direction for Baylor to hold on to him. I know Steve Wiltfong put in a crystal ball for him to flip to Oregon. That's kind of been, based on the quotes that he's told me as well, it definitely seems like Oregon piqued his interest, which is not surprising at all. I mean, that's a good football program. So Baylor's going to have to do a lot here to try to turn this around. I do know he's been locked in for a while, but also, big schools are there. Big schools are offering a lot, and big schools are, coming after him, and Oregon is the main competitor right now. So that's kind of the bad news of the week on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, and Oregon has a lot of success in Texas, and they are flying high right now, no pun intended. And this current situation, that's not a great prognosis for Baylor's, arguably best commit or one of their best commits, but we'll see what happens there, although, that doesn't sound like a great update. Meanwhile, though, there was a more positive one. Brody Wilhelm, Austin Westlake, tight end, class of 2025, committed to the Bears, had offers from Navy and Texas State and Old Dominion as well, but 6'5", 220. I think everybody was surprised to see a commit roll in, just given where the program is right now. It's like, well, wait a second, what? They're getting commits still? That's just kind of a sign of the times, unfortunately, but your thoughts on what this means and how it, factors into the big picture here.
Well, Baylor tight end coach Jared Anderson has been, really trying to find the tight end for this class, and just came up empty a couple times, whether it was Stevie Amar or Keoti Armstrong or Nicholas Townsend. There's been a few guys that Baylor really tried to recruit, weren't able to land them. So now you fast forward, and Brody Wilhelm went into a Baylor camp over the summer, did a workout in front of the coaches, specifically Spavital and Anderson, ended up getting the offer actually within the past month, and then ends up committing shortly after. But Baylor didn't offer right after that camp. They kind of took their time with the process, wanted to see how he started off this year, and he has been on a roll. So far this season, he put together 15 receptions for 208 yards and 4 touchdowns, and then add on this past week in which he had 70 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. So he's up to 6 touchdowns on the season. He's been really good. Last year he had 663 yards and 7 touchdowns. Certainly more of a pass catcher, which Baylor is looking for in this offense. Going to have to improve as a blocker. But as a guy that's going to play a lot of slot tight end, he kind of fits exactly what they're looking for in that regard. Lots of size, good height, good wingspan, fast, athletic, and very productive during his time in high school.
All right. Anything else on the recruiting front?
No, I think those are the main storylines. I will say this. I'm going to have a piece out on Sikkim 365 Premium probably tomorrow, just with some of the recruits, kind of their takeaways from Baylor's first half of the season, kind of where their head is at. And it's pretty positive. And it's really fascinating to see that, because I know a lot of fans are kind of, just out on this team and out on this season, but recruits aren't there yet. And they're still very bought in. A lot of these guys are still locked into the program, despite I know the Caleb Burns one isn't great to see. But I think in general, you're seeing a lot of recruits kind of bought into what's going on. But they also understand that Baylor has to win football games. So I think that's kind of where the conversation is at this point. But Baylor's done a nice job just kind of reassuring things and just trying to continue to be positive. And I think Baylor recruits are seeing that, honestly.
All right, so there's football, all the updates that we can provide for you in the time allotted here. We'll keep a track, obviously, on recruiting 24/7 over at Sikkim365.com and all the other storylines and conversations to be had around this football program. So if you hadn't got your fill of a certain topic or storyline or whatever, you can go all day long arguing or agreeing or whatever, just talking out into the void with people over on the website and the forums. And so go and check that out if you haven't already. But meanwhile, we do need to turn the page for the rest of this here. I will mention the AP Top 25 women's poll just came out, and Baylor finds itself, Nikki Collin and company, at number 12 to start the year. And based on what I've seen, you got South Carolina, UConn, USC, Texas, UCLA, that's your top 5. Iowa State, the top Big 12 team, at number 8. You got OU, obviously, they're in the SEC now, but they're at number 10. K-State, right one spot behind you at number 13. West Virginia's in there, and that's about it. So that's the women's poll right there, but the Baylor women starting off at number 12. And then over on the men's side of thing last week, we had the Big 12 preseason nods come out, and very interesting to see just the start of that all getting underway here, as the Big 12 is going to be very well represented. 5 top 10 teams to start off the year for the league, although I did see our buddy Evan Maya and his projections had the SEC as the top league, like top to bottom, but there is the argument that, yeah, they are, in terms of the Big 12, the best at the top, arguably, but maybe top to bottom. There's an argument to be made. We'll see that play out over the course of the next few months. But men's basketball-wise, preseason all Big 12, they finished 4th in the voting behind Kansas, Houston, and Iowa State. Did not receive a first-place votes. Those other 3 did. Arizona did as well at number 5, but Baylor, no first-place votes. On the preseason all Big 12 team, you had nobody on the first team. L.J. Cryer, former Bear, is on that first team. But on the second team, you had North Shadow Mir and Jeremy Roach. Jeremy Roach, also the preseason co-newcomer of the year. And VJ Edgecombe, the preseason freshman of the year. So a couple of guys getting nods on the second teams, and then some of those superlatives, and a 4th-place preseason vote for the Bears. And maybe we'll backtrack to the women. We don't have time. Theirs came out, I guess, a few weeks ago, and we just, I guess, missed it. But for the men, any thought on that or the women's AP vote?
Right. So quickly on, I'll just mention the women's really quick. They are 3rd in Big 12 voting. They got 2 first-place votes. As far as women on the All Big 12 team, Sarah Andrews and Aaronette Vonleh, the transfer from Colorado, both were on that list of 10. So they're on the preseason All Big 12 team. Nice to see that. I think from Baylor women's basketball, there's a lot of optimism about them having a really good year. And so I'm curious if they can build on the momentum from last year. I think they have a good shot to do that. As far as the men's side goes, 4th in the Big 12, I get it. I understand it. I think Baylor's got a chance to win the Big 12. I think they could be the best team in this league. I think they have plenty of talent. They got a great mixture of veteran experience. I think they got this year more guys who have actually made deep runs in the NCAA tournament with Roach and O'Meara. And I think that's huge for this team as far as winning those close games, winning those big games that matter, whether you go on the road or at home or in tournament environments, they're going to be ready to go. And so I think that's really key for this team in general. Both of them on second team makes a lot of sense. VJ Edgecombe, preseason freshman of the year. He's going to be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft. He is going to be very, very good for Baylor, and I think matches in really well with kind of the other guys that they have on this roster. It's a deep team. And I think in general, their biggest X factor is going to be, what kind of health do they get from Langston Love? Because to have a guy like him coming off your bench, having a guy that can take over a game off your bench is truly a difference maker for this team. And if they can have a fully healthy Langston Love through conference playing in the NCAA tournament, I think it bodes really well for them to kind of achieve their long-term goals this year.
All right, so there's a little bit of hoops, and there will be a lot more, obviously, as we draw closer to the season, but preseason polls starting to come out, so that's enjoyable to see for the hoops heads out there. And start to project. I know Kendall Coutts got some takeaways already on the preseason stuff, so if you want a little bit more basketball discussion, again, over on SicEm365.com, you can find plenty of that ongoing. Matter of fact, to see the headline here, taking stock of Baylor men's basketball's preseason ratings, what do they mean? So that is one bit. Obviously, Ashley will have his thoughts and coverage, and Kendall and the whole crew. All of that getting underway, though, so should be another exciting year for the men's team and the women's team both as they sit pretty to start the season. All right, getting to some questions here in the mailbag, and then we'll predict the Baylor game at the end of this podcast, and maybe some other Big 12 games depending on what kind of time we have left. Scotty B, the Baylor King, how many sacks and quarterback pressures do you think the Baylor defense needs to get to slow down the Texas Tech offense?
The defenses that have had success against Tech have had at least 10 pressures. So I would say Baylor has to get to at least 10, and then you naturally end up with a sack or two because of that. I'll say 2 sacks and 10 quarterback pressures is kind of the baseline.
Alpha Needle, is Sawyer Robertson the best Baylor quarterback since Seth Russell?
This is a good question. Do we count Jarrett Stidham's time, or are we saying 2016 once, Seth Russell's last kind of full year as the quarterback because Seth wasn't there? If we're not, then yes, it's Stidham. But if so, yeah, it probably is Sawyer, honestly. The way he's played this year, the fact that he's got another year of eligibility left, I think it probably is him.
Yeah, initially I was like, no way. And then you start thinking about it, and you're like, well, I mean, Anu Solomon and
Charlie Brewer
and Blake Shapen.
Gary Bohannon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. It's kind of putting lipstick on a pig, honestly. I mean, there's not been great quarterback play. Like, to really compare it, it's like,
yeah.
I don't know. I'd rather compare, like, is Seth Russell better than Bryce Petty or better than RG3?
For sure,
yeah. And I know, like, that's not where we are, but yeah, splitting hairs, I guess, yeah, he is the best quarterback.
Right, but the list is...
It's not a fun list.
It's not a crazy thing to say, I don't
No,
think.
every guy's had, like, their moments, here and there, and they've also had their down moments as well. All those guys that have played since. Gary, all of them.
I will say this. From a talent standpoint, it's Sawyer Robertson, but I also don't want to diminish, kind of what Charlie Brewer did for that program.
Bohannon
and Gary, too. Yeah, Gary as well. And, Shapen won a few big games, including the Big 12 championship. So I don't want to take away the winning side of it because you're exactly right. That should matter.
Yeah, no, it definitely should. I mean, they contributed to big moments and bigger moments than some other programs, including the one we're talking about today, have had in the last few years. So
Sawyer has a chance on Saturday to try to kind of remedy the winning situation.
Well, and Sawyer's also going back home, which we didn't mention that, but he is a Lubbock boy, so he will be back in his hometown. You hope he doesn't hyperventilate as a result of that, but instead embraces that, kind of like Rocco Beck did. Not going back home to Morgantown, but going back where his parents were athletes. His dad's getting inducted in the School Hall of Fame, and he handled all that really well. So hopefully Sawyer Robertson can do that with what undoubtedly will probably be a pretty big crowd of supporters out in Lubbock. Alpha Needle ranked the following Texas cities from favorite to least favorite.
Okay.
He lists like the 8 cities in Texas. Waco's going to be last on here, I can already tell, because I'm from Tyler, so I'm going to give that the nod over Waco. But
and Lubbock's down there too.
For me. I had a good time in Lubbock, though, when I was out there. Yeah. Different time in life, but enjoyable nonetheless. So, I don't know. This is going to take up too much time.
I'll just say my top are Austin, where I live now, San Antonio, where I'm from, and then I'd probably say Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, and then the ones that we just mentioned are the bottom.
Yeah, I think I'd go, man. I really like Houston a lot, but what'd you say was your number one?
Austin.
Yeah, I mean, Austin would probably be my number one, and then any combination. I don't really splitting hairs here. If we had more time to really riff on this, I would get more in depth to it. But yeah, I think Austin would probably be my number one, although Dallas is where I've spent the majority of my time outside of Tyler. So yeah, I don't know. It's fun to contemplate. Maybe we'll revisit that at some point. Doc Crowell with Kendrick Simpkins and Caden Jenkins back, and Carl Williams getting healthier per your report. Plus Garmin Randolph and Cooper Lands working back up toward full speed after their injuries. Do you think the defense performs better this week than versus Iowa State?
It absolutely better, or they're going to get ran out of Lubbock. I mean, if they play like they did against Iowa State, especially in the second half, I mean, Tech's going to score 40-something points, and I don't think Baylor's going to be able to keep up with that. I do think all these guys back is going to be key in this game. I think we forget kind of, the situation that they had where Carl is playing much less than 100%. You're seeing Garmin Randolph get back early from a high ankle injury, and that's tough. from an ankle sprain, I guess. Cooper Lands as well. I mean, just trying to rush back and probably not being at full health. Getting Caden Jenkins back, obviously, against these wide receivers will be key as well. So I think it all bodes well for, again, them to be the healthiest they've been all year heading into this matchup on Saturday.
And we'll see who all is officially back and whatnot, but it sounds like they're projecting well, and that was something mentioned on Monday. So, yeah, obviously to get all these guys back would be significant. In what similar ways will Texas Tech stress the Baylor defense as Iowa State did, and do you think they put anything in place during the week off to work on it?
I mean, really, the way they'll stress them is just stopping base running carries. You know, if you're going to hand the ball off to your running back, Tech has done a pretty good job at slowing that down. Iowa State did a pretty good job of that against Baylor. But outside of that, Tech really doesn't do the same things Iowa State does. They don't have the guys on the outside to cover like Iowa State does. They definitely don't have the safeties like Iowa State does. And I actually think their linebacker play isn't as good as Iowa State's either. And so put all that together, they're not going to stress Baylor in the same ways. But again, they're a very opportunistic defense. They're going to try to force turnovers. They're going to force you to play physical. So if Baylor's not ready for it, you know, you could end up seeing a performance where Tech plays above what they've done all year, which would be really disappointing.
Big Cheese 83, who do you think, or who do you predict to be the top three scorers for Baylor men's and women's basketball this season?
I mean, for women's basketball, I think Sarah Andrews and Aaronette Vonleh are pretty squarely the top two. I'm not sure who I'd put at three. Maybe Lil Paige Bugs, maybe put her at three. For men, I think it's probably Jeremy Roach, Norchad O'Meara, and then I'll go with VJ Edgecombe.
How many yards do y'all think we need to hold Taj Brooks to have a chance in this game from clever username 99?
You got to hold Tech under 150 yards rushing, so you're probably going to have to hold Taj Brooks to under like 130 is what I would guess. You'll probably get 20 yards from someone else, so maybe 130.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. He's run for under 133 of 5 games that he's played in this year. He's had 128, 3 TDs against Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously
172 and 2 against Cincinnati. Arizona State had 117 and no scores, 109 and 1 against UNT, 153 and 1 against ACU. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, he's hit the 100-yard mark in every single game, and he's gone over 150 on 2 occasions.
Yeah.
So
maybe it's more like 120, but I still think it's somewhere in that range.
All right, and continuing to roll on here, how many explosive plays can Baylor allow and still pull off a victory in Lubbock? Over, under 4.5. What are you taking from AF Blue 82?
Okay. Explosive. So
over 4.5, and I don't think
yards.
they're not winning this game.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. You need to make Tech drive down the field and be efficient for long drives. You can't just give up these huge chunk plays. So I'll say, yeah, they probably got to give up less than 5. I would say is probably, so maybe 4.
I mean, explosive plays are probably turning into touchdowns most likely.
Maybe.
So that's I mean, maybe, but
they don't have to. I mean, it's a deep shot downfield. You tackle the guy. I mean, big run here and there. I mean,
yeah, but they're not really like a 70-yard play type of team. They're more or less like a, I don't know. I just think that explosive plays normally lead to points. So if you're giving up 4 explosive plays, that could be costly, but I don't know. Whatever you got to say.
I would say 4, so I'll go under 4.5 is what they need, and I think they'll get under 4.5.
All right, Golden Green, what happened to Aranda and Max weekly segments with 365 Radio? Do you think the lack of a media availability has hurt the program or brand in recent years? I'd love to tell you, but all I know is that the Aranda interviews were called off prior to this season. So we don't get him, or Smokey doesn't get the one-on-ones every couple weeks, and I think that was actually okay on our end. We wanted to talk to coordinators, and we were not allowed that opportunity on 365 Sports for whatever reason. The lack of availability hurting the program or whatever. Like we also, with Mac, like we used to have him weekly. Now we got him in studio, which was great about a month or so ago. That was the first time we talked to him in how long, Garrett? Like 3 months or something like that?
It says Big 12 Media Days, I believe.
Okay,
no, we didn't even get him then.
We didn't get him then. So it was like whatever pre-June when we got him to all the way up until like a month ago when it used to be like every week, which, hey, we don't need every week anymore, but that's all been on their end and whatever else they're doing. Grayson and Colt talk to him now, so we don't talk to him on 365 Sports. I don't know what to tell you as far as that goes. As far as the lack of a media availability, hurting the program or brand. I don't even care at this point. So yeah, I guess that would answer your question in some ways. Is like I'm like whatever about it. Whereas normally I would have cared, and at this point I don't really care. So you can take that as it hurting it for sure.
I think all media availability is really good for visibility of the program and really good for fans, especially when you're going through especially when you're going through tough times, because fans definitely appreciate honesty and being able to hear that openly, multiple times a week, like we kind of used to hear when Aranda was on with Smokey. I don't see how that's a bad thing personally, but yeah, I get it. I get it to a certain extent, but I just think for fans, it would be really nice for them to be able to hear from Aranda in a setting that is more just asking whatever questions, Smokey wanted to ask or whoever wanted to ask. So, yeah, I think that it does, hurt the program a little bit.
Yeah, and I just think that, like I said, like I care about covering and all that kind of stuff, but like they've got me at the point now where I'm sort of like apathetic to it. Like, okay, well, you've taken that away and you've taken that away, so like I don't really care anymore. Like we'll just talk about it on our own, and that would have been a fun segment, or it would have been nice to ask questions, but kind of learned to live without it at this point. So we'll form our own opinions and just continue to do it that way. But yeah, I don't think it's positive. And I do think it can be negative in some ways. Appreciate the questions there. And that is a thank you list of Golden Green and AF Blue 82 and Clever Username 99 and Big Cheese and Doc and Alpha Needle and Scotty B. Appreciate you all for the mailbag questions this week. All right, prediction on Baylor and Texas Tech.
Yeah, so the game's on ESPN2 at 3 p.m. in Lubbock. Tech 6.5-point favorite, over under 55.5. I've been back and forth on this game a lot, kind of all the beginning of this week and last week as to what I was going to do as far as predicting this game. But the more I dive into it, the more I think that Baylor should be able to move the football. It's the best matchup they've had all year against Power 4 competition in their ability to move the football. And I would also say that I think their inability to move the football has cost them in a few games this year, whether it's turning the ball over, inconsistent rushing attack, not moving the chains, keeping the defense on the field too long. I think this game sets up well for them to correct that. I think this is a game that they pretty much know they have to win if they want to make a bowl game. I think it's a game that their team really needs and wants to win. And I just think in general it sets up well for Dave Aranda to have a good game plan going into this. And I think if Baylor's going to be in a comfortable situation against Tech, I think Baylor can make them a little bit more uncomfortable defensively. Ultimately, I think both teams are going to score some points. But I'm going to take Baylor to win this game. And I'm going to take the Bears. Let's go with 34-31, Baylor.
All right. I'll take Tech, and I don't know my score yet. That'll be in the predictions at the end of the week. But something like, 31-24 along those lines is probably where I'll fall, somewhere within that kind of a parameter. But, yeah, I'm definitely taking Tech here. You list out logical reasons, but you're playing at home. You're 5-1. You're a better team. You know who you are. I think you've got more belief. I think that you've arguably maybe got more talent. At least that's shown itself and proven itself, like a Taj Brooks, like some of these receivers that are emerging. I think Baron Morton's played very well. And there's definitely questions on Tech's side of things, but I just feel like there's way more questions on Baylor's side of things. Like we don't wonder if Tech's going to show up and play well this weekend. Like we just know that they will. And if they don't, that would be surprising. We have no idea what Baylor's going to show up and be like. And so, I'll go with the more of the thing that I do know, which is that Texas Tech's in a pretty good spot right now, and they're at home. And yeah, I'll go with the Red Raiders in a competitive game.
I definitely get, and that's where I was at last week. But again, I just think this game's going to matter a whole lot more to Baylor than it is Tech. And that's not to say that Joey won't have his guys ready or that Tech won't be ready to go. But I think that I think when you go through the disappointments that Baylor's gone through throughout the year and feeling like you're better than what your record states, I do think there's a little bit of an extra motivation here. And motivation does matter quite a bit in college football, especially when the talent is relatively equal. Sure, Tech, I think, has a few more difference makers, guys that you can, like a Taj Brooks. Baylor doesn't have a Taj Brooks. But I think in general, I think Baylor's going to be ready for this game. And if they're not and they lose this game, then like I said, I don't think they're making a bowl game. So I think this season is pretty much over.
All right, so anything before we head on out? I mean, we can make some Big 12 picks, I suppose, but anything else of note that takes priority here?
No, I think the Big 12 is interesting this week, so let's just talk for 5 minutes about a few of them while we can.
All right, on Friday nights, you've got BYU, number 13 team in the country, unbeaten, 3-0 in the Big 12, 6-0 overall, hosting Oklahoma State, who is with Baylor right there at 0-3 in the Big 12. They're not winning the league, even though they were one of the preseason favorites to do so. I don't know what the last check is on Ollie Gordon, whether he's available the rest of this year or not. I don't know that it matters because it hasn't mattered when he's been available so far this year. Their defense stinks. Alan Bowman stinks. And BYU, I don't think is like a great team, but they're a really good team on defense, and Jake Ratzlaff's playing really well for them offensively. They got LJ Martin back where they've had basically no run game. Now maybe they're starting to get some guys back to help out with that, which would be fantastic as they turn the corner to try and continue remaining unbeaten. They're at home as well. It's night game on a Friday night, 9.5-point favorites. I see no way in hell that Oklahoma State wins this game.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's not winning in Provo in a night game. Not many teams are able to do that. Oklahoma State's definitely not doing that, and that's actually a really good thing for Baylor because Baylor plays Oklahoma State next week. So both these teams could be hobbling into McLean Stadium with pretty poor records, or, maybe Baylor's turning the corner, but I don't see Oklahoma State winning this game. And they're a 9.5-point underdog heading into Provo as well.
Yeah, so I'll take BYU there. Arizona State, 5-1, 2-1 in the league at Cincinnati, 4-2, 2-1 in the league. So somebody will be 3-1 and feeling good about their positioning. Cam Scatterbu, one of the great stories and players to watch in the league this year. But Brendan Sorsby, the QB at Cincinnati, has been a very good story in his own right and one of the more entertaining players to watch this year. So those are a couple of the headliners. You got Xavier Henderson and other guys as well, Jordan Tyson. But Arizona State at Cincinnati, the Bearcats, 2.5-point favorites.
Toss-up game, complete toss-up game. You could tell me this game goes any number of directions, and I would believe you. I think Arizona State's coming off of a very emotional win over Utah, and so for that reason, I think Cincinnati ends up winning this game, especially at home. And they need to win some games at home. They have not been great at home under Scott Satterfield, so I think they turned that around this week since he's a pretty good team.
Yeah, I think I give a slight edge to Cincy maybe, but I don't know. I would need to, if I needed to pick this one, I would pick it later in the week and have a couple more days to think on it.
Hopefully get a few more points.
Yeah. And just stew on it a little bit. 2:30 ESPN Plus, Houston, Kansas.
True.
In in Kansas City, as the stadium's still under construction. So this at Arrowhead, the home of the Chiefs. KU, 6.5-point favorites. They're 1-5. They're not going to a bowl game. Houston's 2-4. They're not going to one either. But Houston at least has a little bit of momentum. They know who their starting quarterback is now, is Zeon Chris, and it looks like he'll be the guy moving forward. So thoughts on the Cougs at the Jayhawks? I mean, Houston's defense versus a Kansas offense that's at least seeing Jalen Daniels play a little bit better. The last we looked at them a couple of weeks ago, but certainly not what they hoped for post Andy Kotelnicki.
Yeah, I'm taking Kansas with ease. I think KU, I know Houston's gotten better, but I think they're also going to show some cracks down the second half of this season. I think Kansas is one who's kind of due a win. They've been so close multiple times. I think they're going to win this one.
Arizona 4-point favorites. I think I'd go KU as well. Arizona 4-point favorites hosting Colorado.
Yeah, I'm going to take Colorado to go in there and beat Arizona. I think Colorado's the better football team.
Need to see how healthy some of their receivers are, and even then, I think they still have a deeper receiver unit than just Teteroa McMillan, at Arizona. They have been pretty unimpressive in how up and down that they are. So I think Colorado's a better football team, and if all things are equal, then I think Colorado should go win that game. UCF at Iowa State, 6:30 on FS1. By the way, Colorado, Arizona, 3 o'clock on Fox. But 6:30 FS1 Saturday night, UCF at number 9, Iowa State. Cyclones 2 touchdown favorites at home. This one's pretty easy. Give me Iowa State all day.
Yeah, 2 teams trending in completely different directions. I'm going to take Iowa State with ease.
6:30 on Fox, number 17, K-State at West Virginia. KSU 3-point favorites. West Virginia pushing Neil Brown back on the hot seat because they're just tired of the same old script, and I understand that. But at the same time, they've been in a lot of close games. They've lost to some pretty good teams. Another opportunity. I feel like if they don't win this game, then I think that might do it for Neil Brown. Really, like they might not fire him on Monday, but I feel like there's going to be no reeling back the fan base. That'll be back-to-back major missed opportunities after losing to Iowa State last week. And I think I take Kansas State in this game. I think that they are better as a result of getting bludgeoned in Provo a couple weeks ago, and they should only have more confidence after how they closed that game at Colorado last week.
Yeah, give me K-State. I think West Virginia is going to be they're going to be right around that bowl level. We'll see if they get there, but I don't think they're being Kansas State. K-State's just a little too hot right now.
Yep. And then 9:30 ESPN, the nightcap, Utah. We know Cam Rising's done. Not only for the season now officially, but probably as a Ute, because I just don't think it makes any sense for that program to welcome him back. All goodwill aside, I think you have to move on at this point and just try something different moving forward. So maybe he'll play his 8th year somewhere, but I don't think it'll be in Salt Lake City. Regardless, he's not available, so it'll be Isaac Wilson and the Utes at home against a TCU team that's been very up and down. And it's pretty much all Josh Hoover. Can he throw you to a win, or will he turn the ball over and that compounds with a bad defense and you lose? So who do you like here, TCU, Utah?
Yeah, I'm taking Utah. I think Josh Hoover's going to turn the ball over too much, and Utah will just run the football, play good defense, and find a way to get it done, especially at home.
Yeah, I think I'll take Utah here, but that might be another one. If you check back in a couple of days, I might change my opinion on that. But yeah, that's interesting for sloppy, bad reasons for both sides of the coin there in Salt Lake City. And there you have it. There is a full slate. I don't think they've had a full slate in conference play yet. I think this is the first full-on everybody's in action type of weekend. So that'll be a lot of fun, especially with the craziness of the league that we've seen to this point. What is that? 9:15 Friday night to 9:30 the following day. You'll have Big 12 football action every few hours or over the course of most of that time period. So, yeah, busy weekend, and that is your Big 12 schedule. So, anything before we head on out here, Grayson?
Just be sure to check out Sikkim 365 Premium, all kinds of news, notes, coverage, recruiting, football, everything like that. Big week ahead for Baylor as they kind of face a must-win in Lubbock.
Yes, should be very interesting one way or the other. I mean, you win, and that obviously changes the feelings around the program in a good way. You lose, and that just kind of bogs you down even further, and you just wonder how much further you can continue sliding down. So this is key to kind of see where this team's at to start the second half of the season, and it all take place this weekend in Lubbock, Texas. Kickoff at 3 o'clock on ESPN2. So that'll do it for us. We'll be back next week to talk about whatever the result is, and then obviously look ahead to, Oklahoma State after that, who will be making their way to Waco, and could very well be 0-4 it could be the battle of 0-4s in the Big 12 maybe next week in Waco if neither one can handle their business. Hopefully that's not the case, but we will see, and we will talk about it either way next Tuesday. Thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes, Jack McKenzie as well, and for Grayson Grundhoefer, I'm Craig Smoak. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Join us each Tuesday live on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page at 11 a.m. And until next time, this has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.